If they're not strapped into their seats, they will hit the ceiling. If you don't want to be hurt, it is entirely in your power not to be hurt. The Singapore Airlines turbulence incident was, I think, one of the most violent and consequential that I've heard of for many years. These things, as bad as this, are very rare indeed. If you think about when you heard the last of severe injuries, multiple severe injuries on board an aircraft, I think it was some time ago. There are millions of flights every year, all the way around the world. So the chances of it happening to any one of you as an individual is very low indeed. But it can happen, and it will happen again. This event was particularly severe because of what was happening in the cabin. I'm sure some people were strapped into their seats, but the vast majority of people were either unstrapped or even walking around because it was meal service. The aircraft was in the cruise. It wasn't just after takeoff. It wasn't just before landing. It was clear, very, very clear, because a meal service was in progress, that the crew had not anticipated any turbulence. This was not something that they could have forecast. It just happened. And because so many people were walking around and were unstrapped, there were lots of injuries. If every single person had been strapped in on this very same event, there would have been no injuries. Every time you fly, I suspect that when the seatbelt sign goes off, you are reminded that it's a wise idea to leave your seatbelt, as they say, loosely fastened at all times during the flight, unless you want to get up and go to the toilet or whatever it is. I don't tie my seatbelt at times like that very loosely. I tie it slightly loosely because if you get into some severe turbulence, I don't want to float 2 feet off my seat before the seatbelt comes and pulls me back down again. I don't want to go off my seat at all. My background is as an RAF pilot. I used to do aerobatics a lot. I'm used to being strapped in over my shoulders and everything. So I suppose it doesn't matter to me. But frankly, here we are talking about a major aviation event in which a lot of people got hurt. If you don't want to be hurt, it is entirely in your power not to be hurt. Whenever you're in your seat and have no reason to get out of it, you should have your seat belt not tight, but it should be fastened, and it should be such that if the aircraft does encounter turbulence, you haven't got too much room to move inside your seatbelt. I mean, after all, you're in a seat, you want to stay there, you want your bum to stay in contact with the cushion, so just tighten it to the point where it's comfortable. Crews prepare for every route by carrying out lots of checks. One of the principal checks is that they get a meteorological forecast for the whole route, and they make a mental note of the parts of the journey where turbulence of some kind is expected. There are all sorts of places where you might well expect it, and this was one of them, okay? Now, the aircraft was in its cruising flight, so it wasn't intending to climb or descend for a while. It was just in level flight, but it is in a tropical area. In tropical areas, you get a lot of convective cloud. That's high cumulonimbus cloud with a lot of turbulence inside it. The pilots during the daytime can see those and they never go through them. They always go around them. At nighttime, they can see those clouds on weather radar and they don't go through them, they go around them. But in fact, if you fly not very far away from one of these clouds, and you might be forced to do that by the fact that there are two not far away from each other and you have to go between them, you know you're going to encounter some turbulence. However, the crew had decided that a meal service could go ahead, so they were not anticipating any turbulence according to their weather forecast or according to what they could see out the window. An air pocket is a complete fiction. I think if I said, nature abhors a vacuum, you would understand what I mean. Basically, you cannot have a little bit of sky which is empty of air. There just isn't such a thing. What causes turbulence is vertical movement of air. It's either going up or it's going down. I think we're all thoroughly familiar with horizontal movement of air, and we know how powerful it can be. We call it wind, and we could call it a hurricane if it was that strength. But you can get updrafts and downdrafts, and they can be extremely powerful, especially in tropical areas. So if you attempt to fly through that cloud, first of all, you get hit by a strong downdraft, and that will make the passengers in the aircraft, which is flung downwards, that will mean that if they're not strapped into their seats, they will hit the ceiling. And the next thing that will happen is you'll progress into the area where there's a strong updraft, and then having hit the ceiling, you will now hit your seat very, very hard. That is turbulence. All these quotes of 6,000 feet in 5 minutes, that's actually a very slow descent. That was not the turbulence. The aircraft was definitely upset by this turbulence. We know that because people got injured inside the aircraft. But actually, that is the kind of rate of descent which you would actually carry out if you had begun your descent into an airfield. It's not really very fast. 6,000 feet it's not very much, and to take three minutes to do it, it's absolutely nothing. Now, I think that the aircraft was upset by the turbulence. It probably tripped the autopilot out. The pilots have lots of things to think about. They know that they've got to get the passengers secured again, so they put out an announcement to the cabin saying, everybody, if you're not in your seat, recover your seat and put your seatbelt on. And cabin crew, stop your meal service and strap in yourselves. So all of that has to happen. The other thing is that they want to know whether they can get out of the turbulence. Okay, now it may have stopped. It may have been just a momentary upset. But if the turbulence continues, especially if it continues violently, the first thing you do is you slow down a bit. It's a bit like being on a very bumpy road. If you slow down, the bumps don't feel so dramatic. Same for an aircraft. It has an ideal speed for coping with turbulence, and the pilots will make the aircraft slow down to the speed where it can cope with turbulence best. It's not only good for the airplane, it's better for the passengers. And if the turbulence still continues, you're looking around to say, what on earth is causing this? Can we escape it? So you've got, ordinary options like, do I turn left? Will that take me out of it? Do I turn right? Do I descend? So we don't know yet because we haven't had any, formal statements about what the crew decided to do. But the decision to descend might have been to get out of the turbulence. I think it's a thoroughly reasonable thing to suggest that climate change, by which we really mean global warming, will cause more high-level turbulence, or more turbulence generally speaking. Well, I think an awful lot of us have discovered that it produces global warming. It may be producing slightly warmer summers, but it also produces in certain parts much wetter ones. What happens with general global warming is that more of the sea's moisture evaporates into the air. So the air is carrying much more moisture, and therefore there is much more moisture to form clouds. And if you combine that with higher levels of global heating, then when the air gets heated, it rises, it forms clouds. The hotter they are, the more vigorous they are. So yes, it's quite true it's quite reasonable to suggest that we will, as a result of global warming, get more high-level turbulence. But I don't think that at this time we have the statistics to absolutely prove that that's already happening.